Okay. How many mitzvot are there?
Many.
Give me the official count. 613, right? 613. Tayag mitzvot, the gematria number for the 613. So that means every day you sit and you think, how can I do 613 mitzvot, right? No. Why not?
Well, you can't.
You can. Well, what do you mean I can't? How can you tell me that I can't do the mitzvah?
You don't have the ability, but
right.
There are many. I don't know how many are related to the land of Israel.
Land of Israel, major category, right?
One that you can't go right away.
Right. There's many that are related to the temple, both when the temple stands or the actual sacrifices that took place at the temple. All right. So it's getting easier and easier. Any other mitzvot that?
There are some that apply only to Kohanim or Leviim.
Women are exempt from time-bound. It's
a little more complicated in the modern world, but there's some mitzvot. Let's flip it the other way, that only women get to do, and some mitzvot that only men get to do, having to do with our physiology, which means that pretty much no one can do all of them. Right? Even if you were a Kohen living in the time of the temple in the land of Israel, there would still be at least some mitzvot that you couldn't do because you either were or weren't a man or a woman, or you just didn't have the opportunity. For example, you can't do pidyon haben, the redemption of the firstborn male, if your firstborn is a girl. You'll never be able to do that mitzvah. It's just cross it off the list, never going to happen. Or other mitzvot, such as only remarrying the wife you divorced if she hasn't been subsequently remarried. That's a mitzvah that's rather specific. And if it doesn't come up, it doesn't come up. And therefore, no one will be able to do all 613, as Susan put it, not because of lack of ability, but simply because of lack of opportunity or the basic wherewithal. But today, we're going to focus on just a little bit of this topic here. Because in Parashat Emor, we begin to get some more instructions about some of the limitations of being a Kohen. Up to this point, much of what we've talked about has been the perks of being a Kohen, all of the benefits of being a Kohen. Right? You get the honor of serving at the temple or the Mishkan altar during the wilderness period. You have the honor of receiving major portions of the sacrifices for yourself, and in many other cases also for your family. You receive special trumah, special gifts from the congregation. There are special tithes that are set aside for the Kohanim and Leviim. So far, it's all been easy sailing. But there are limits when you are a Kohen as well. And so that's what we're going to tackle. And in Parashat Emor, we're going to find them. So this is page 717. We're going to start right at the beginning. And it's chapter 21 in the book of Vayikra, in the book of Exodus. In the book of Leviticus. Too many us's. Exodus, Leviticus. 717. Is that type of airplane? 717?
707.
707. There we go. Yeah. I wonder if they named all those sevens because people consider 7 lucky, and they were trying to help make people not be as nervous about flying. Yeah, you're pretty much not going to see a lot of airlines. Yeah, Flight 666 leaving for Phoenix.
Like 13.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what Phoenix feels like at the wrong time of year. That's where the joke was going. All right, so chapter 21 of the book of Vayikra, verse 1, and I'm going to need a volunteer. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Okay.
Your turn today, Susan?
Here we go.
All right.
The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the priests, the son of Aaron, and say to them."
All right, and of course, this isn't just the priests, the sons of Aaron. This is your brother and the rest of your family. So it's a family conversation. All right, keep going.
None shall define himself.
I think you want to check that.
None shall defile. What did I say?
Define.
Defile himself for any deed person among his kin, except
Dead.
what? Among his kin.
Any dead person.
Dead.
Okay, let's try that again.
Okay.
None shall defile himself or any dead person among his kin, except for the relatives that are closest to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, and his brother, also for a virgin sister, close to him, because she has not married. For her he may defile himself, but he shall not defile himself as a kinsman by marriage, and so profane himself.
All right. So first of all, English. Defile, profane. Right? These are wonderfully evocative and often insulting English words. They can be used that way in Hebrew, but not automatically. So when we say defile, what are we talking about here? Right? You become horrible forever after, and you are now a terrible person and immoral and all of that, right?
Ritual
It's
impurity.
more unclean.
Right. It's unclean in the sense of ritual uncleanliness, ritual impurity, which simply means that you would not be able to come to the altar. But if you're a Kohen, that means you can't officiate at the altar or indeed eat from anything that comes off the altar. For us regular Joes, if I am ritually impure, it inhibits my ability to go to the temple and perform any of the rituals that need to be done, or to initiate the rituals to be done then by the Kohanim. If you're a Kohen and you are ritually impure, who does it bother? Who does it inhibit?
Will prevent you from doing your work, so that it will make it more difficult for somebody else to come and bring a sacrifice.
Exactly. When you're a Kohen, your problem becomes the community's problem, because the community needs you to fulfill a certain role. And one of the criteria for fulfilling that role is that you will be ritually pure. So if you are no longer ritually pure, especially by something that you had control over, then you are now causing trouble for the community. So it's great to be a Kohen, but you have to be prepared to serve the community. And one of the preparations is ritual purity. How are we doing so far? Okay. With that being said, are we then surprised that the Torah makes allowances at all? Right? Because it could have been, remember, always try to think of what the Torah could have said. It helps us understand what it did say. The Torah could have said, if you are a Kohen, you will never become ritually impure on behalf of those who are deceased for attending to the needs of the deceased. Therefore, you will never disrupt the community. Sorry, when they die, someone else takes care of it. But the Torah didn't say that. Instead, the Torah said, you have to be ready for the community, but with regards to these folks, it's okay. You need to attend to their needs. And the community will just have to get by without you until the purification process takes place after having become ritually impure for being in contact. It's compassion on the Kohanim. It's giving them allowances that the Torah didn't have to give. But instead, God chose to give them this ability to be able to be there for those that they mourned.
At any one time, how many Kohanim did we? I know the list of all the sons.
Right.
But roughly, we have Aaron and his sons,
Mm-hmm.
and three or
You mean for the other clans, right?
the officiating Kohanim.
Uh,
It's not one Kohen that's doing all the offering.
At which time period? So at this particular time period, you have Aaron and you have his sons, and that's it. And then as the generations go on, there are more and more and more born, and the number of Kohanim expands. I don't know if it's arithmetically or exponentially, because it's not quite a straight exponential curve because the population. But definitely, you end up with so many Kohanim that they have to take turns. That there is a national rota of which Kohanim are officiating at the temple and which ones are on standby duty back at home.
So we have, if we're talking about the Mishkan,
Mm-hmm.
then we had three at one point,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're down to one.
We had 4 at one point, 5, right? Because before Nadav and Abihu died, we also had Eliezer,
Eliezer,
right? And then we added Pinchas later. who was officially not part of the list until after his spear incident.
Okay, so we do have more than one.
Yes.
And if, how many people needed to officiate dead
You mean to take care of the needs of the deceased?
of the deceased?
Only one person officially would be needed in order to prepare the body and to lay it to rest.
And so there could always be a stand-in to do sacrifices? I'm just trying to.
You're right. You're right. If the Torah had wanted to be strict, it could have said, you know what? Pick one of the Kohanim, because remember, the Kohanim are almost always likely to be related in some way to the deceased of some other member of the Kohanic family, because it's one family, right? It's like, you know, if my brother loses his father, chances are that's going to be my father too, right? Because we're sort of related. Or if he loses his sister, it's probably going to be my sister. So the Torah could have been strict and simply said, you will not make yourself ritually impure for the needs of the deceased, except one of you will be chosen to do that, while the rest of you remain ritually pure in order to officiate, et cetera, et cetera. But the Torah didn't say that. It could have, practically, and it would have been functionally just fine. It might have made it life easier, in fact, because now you have the potential when, like, for example, Aaron dies later in the wilderness, we do reduce the number of available Kohanim while they mourn down to one, which is Pinchas, who was a grandson. He was the only one left then at the time to be an officiant. So, yeah, the Torah was willing to go out of the way and to inconvenience the rest of the community so that the Kohanim could, without hesitation, mourn this level of relatives, of those that were in the immediate generational circle.
Well, I mean, you'd also compassionately say, you know, you're taking away the ability to mourn your close relative. If you say, no, you can't do this, you've got to be the Kohen and you've got to do the sacrifices.
Right.
You can't attend to something that your heart says you want to.
Conflicting needs, which is what the mitzvot often have to contend with. If you have the need of the mourner and you have the need of the community, generally speaking, we allow the need of the community to outweigh the need of the Kohanim mourning, but for very close relatives, it goes the other direction. And the needs of the Kohanim to grieve for their dead outweighs the needs of the community to have convenient access to the altar. And that balance is very, very delicate, but very important. All right, onward. We're now on page 718, verse 5.
They shall not shave smooth any part of their heads or cut the side growth of their beards or make gashes in their flesh. They shall be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God, for they offer their Lord's gift, the food of their God, and so must be holy.
All right, so now we find out that the Kohanim can't shave any part of their heads, the side growth of their beards, or make gashes in their skin. Make sense?
Gashes in their skin.
Incisions. We'll come back to this with the commentary. Don't worry,
Correct.
because it's like, no, this is something to do. It's I'm bored on Sunday, and you know I just got a pocket knife, and so I'm going to start. What's going on here? We will come back to it. And just a couple more paragraphs, and then we have to get to our commentators.
They shall not marry a woman defiled by harlotry, nor shall they marry one divorced from her husband. For they are holy to their God, and you must treat them as holy, since they offer the food of your God. They shall be holy to you, for I, the Lord, who sanctified you, am holy. All
right, so another repetition of their requirement to be holy. In this case, it is also making a requirement regarding who the Kohanim are allowed to marry. We're going to come back to that first sentence, verse 7 of this paragraph, because what JPS translates as a woman defiled by harlotry, as you'll see over in the Hebrew, reading the word, as you see over in the Hebrew, it's Isha Zona Va Halala. It's a woman who is a zona, which is the word that's usually translated as harlot or prostitute. And then we have and v'chalala, which is, well, something else, meaning to defile or desecrate. And the question is is that word modifying the word zonah, or is that a separate category? And JPS took that decision out of our hands by just using it as the word defiled by, and that way we didn't have to wonder whether it was one or two different categories, but our commentators are going to open that up again so we can look at it. And then we get what is perhaps considered the most startling requirement of the Kohanim in verse 9.
When the daughter of a priest defiles herself through harlotry, it is her father whom she defiles. She shall be put to the fire.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it. Now we go on to get additional restrictions on the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, the one who was unique in service. But we're not going to go through that today because I think we're going to have plenty to talk about just with these 9 verses. All right, yeah, if you could take that and pass them around. All right, so our first question goes back to this first paragraph regarding the mourning practices. There was something conspicuous in its absence from that list, right? It said you're allowed, if you're a Kohen, to mourn for your mother, father, brother, sister, if she is still unattached, meaning she doesn't have anyone else to mourn for her, but is still part of your father's household, your family's household, or for your children. Who's missing from that circle? Spouse, the wife. Your wife dies, you don't get to mourn? Is that what you think the halakha is? You might think that, unless you had read the Sifra, unless you had read the Midrash Halakha. So, our first text at the top of the page.
Only his flesh?
Yeah.
Only his flesh that is near to him. There is no flesh except meaning his wife.
All right, so this is a standard rabbinic style of explanation, which is to take a word and say, what does that word actually mean? And in this particular case, they're saying that it means wife. That any place you see that word, flesh, that it's actually talking about the wife, because we should be of one flesh. Or as they point out more clearly from a recent source.
She is the flesh that is the wife of your father. That is near.
Oh, sorry, very, very, very briefly. So I know that Sifra does that. They do little phrase, explanation, little phrase, explanation, little phrase, explanation. It's very interesting to read. It's just very rapid fire interpretation, which we have to break apart. So back in chapter 18 of Leviticus, it's talking about the fact that you don't sleep with the wife of your father, even if she's not your mother, if you'd remarried or had been married previously. And the word that is used there is the same word that is used here. And the sages say, word A, different context, there clearly referring to a wife, here ambiguous as to who it may refer to. We use the information from where it was clear to make clear the ambiguous case. So there, where flesh meant the wife of your father, here flesh must mean the wife of you. Therefore, you are allowed to mourn and to go through all of the process of mourning that may even cause ritual defilement for your spouse as well. And that is what the halakha is. But there are 2 little caveats, and that's what the next 2 little phrases in italics are going to break apart for us.
That is near.
That is near, right? You can defile yourself for the flesh. That is near, right? What is the that is near teaching us?
To exclude one that was betrothed to him.
So if you've only been betrothed, but you haven't completed the marriage process, then one would not be mourning for her. Does that make sense? I mean, we understand the categories that are involved. You can argue about whether or not it's right or wrong, but and of course it's a moot issue in the modern world where our betrothal happens about 10 minutes before the finalization of the marriage. So we don't have, like they did in the ancient world, a year in between these 2 activities, where one would do the ring ceremony and say, At Mekudeshetli, and that would make the betrothal binding, and then be waiting for the Shefa Brachot at the end of a year when you had the feast to actually bring the 2 together. We do that all pretty much at the same time now, because it just works much more easily that way. But what the halacha is here is saying is that if there was the ceremony for the betrothal and then the woman died, the Kohen would not be able to go and mourn in person within presence of the body for the loss of his fiancée. Clear? Clear. All right, and then one more little twist,
To him.
right? Near to him. What is the to him adding? Why not just say near?
To exclude one that he divorced.
Right, so they were married, but now they're divorced, which means she is no longer to him. Therefore, if she dies after the divorce, even if he is still close and friendly and amicable, which was perfectly reasonable, it's still perfectly reasonable, even if not everyone follows that rule, he would not be allowed to put himself in a position to become ritually impure while engaged in the mourning practice for her. Good? Good. All right. So that's what we're going to handle on the question of the mourning. Now we're going to get to our head and beard and all of that. So any questions on the mourning ritual for the Kohen and their families? All right. Onward. Now we're in the big Rashi, second paragraph. Yes.
They shall not make baldness for the dead.
All right. For the dead. Why does Rashi have to say for the dead? Because the Torah doesn't. Right? When you go back and read verse 5, right, they shall not shave smooth, which is the phrase that he's using here for karcha. You'll notice in that sentence, it never once says dead. It just, after talking about the burial practices and the mourning practices, it then talks about the shaving practices. And what Rashi's trying to point out is that there's a reason for that. That the shaving would be done on behalf of the dead. That people would shave themselves as a sign of mourning. And that is prohibited. Keep reading.
But were not the ordinary Israelites also forbidden to respect in respect of this? Why then is this law especially stated with reference to the priests?
All right, so remember we started off by saying there are some things that are only in Israel, only with the temple, or only if you're a Kohen. It would seem, if you were only reading this section of the Torah, that the whole shaving bald part of the body for the dead was only a prohibition for the Kohanim. But if you've read your Torah in its entirety, you'll know this topic comes up elsewhere, where it's also prohibited for the rest of us. So the question becomes, why mention it here? If all the Kohanim are also part of Israel, then surely they already knew they weren't allowed to shave on behalf of the dead. Why bring it up now, only in context for them? Doesn't that just make things confusing? Explanation from Rashi.
But because in the prohibition addressed to the ordinary Israelites, it is stated in Deuteronomy, you shall not make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. I might think that one is not liable to punishment for making baldness on any other part of the whole head. Scripture therefore states here, upon their heads. And now that we have both commands, the law regarding the Israelites may be derived from that addressed to the priests from similarity of terms.
Which is officially called a Gezerah Shava, right? When you have two terms that are similar in different locations, we can use them, as I mentioned before, to help clarify each other, just like we did with the word for flesh to clarify that it meant wife, the word for shaving to make sure that we are learning both directions. All right, so they're going to unpack that for us.
Okay. The term karcha is used here, and in the prohibition regarding the Israelites, it also uses the term karcha. What is the case here? The prohibition applies to the whole head. So also, there the whole head is included in the prohibition. And on the other hand, how is the case there? The prohibition is limited to making baldness for the dead. So here too, it applies only to such baldness as is made for the dead.
All right, so for the dead, you can't shave any part of your head as a symbol of mourning. and that's being learned by both. But if you wanted to shave most of your head, the peyote are still an issue. But if you wanted to shave most of your head, like if you wanted to, write a word in the back of your head or something and you shave it down, that would be considered acceptable. Although we're going to have to get eventually to the point of what it means to be shaving, because that's later going to be another issue. There are different ways to remove hair, which we'll be dealing with shortly. Make sense? So we see how the rabbis try to understand one piece of Torah by looking at another piece of Torah and then putting them together to say, what did God mean by both of them? Yes? That's what it means to use your head, because you wouldn't understand a sentence of Torah if you didn't understand the other parts of Torah. Of course, you don't understand the other parts of Torah unless you understand this sentence. That's why we have a giant ball of understanding. It's a web, a network of comprehension. It's not something that's done very easily. It takes study. All right, now let's get to the whole corners of the head thing, or the beard.
Neither shall they raise the corner of their beard, because it is written in the prohibition addressed to the ordinary Israelites in Leviticus, you shall not destroy the corners of your beard. All right,
so again, we've already been telling every other Israelite, you don't get to destroy the corners of your beard, but here we're using the term raise, or like razor it, or shave it, in the modern sense of the term of using a sharp knife that literally scrapes the skin to get the hair. There's slight differences, but you might also think it's redundant. Not so. Each one is contributing an important facet. And this is how it goes.
I might think if one removed the hair off with tweezers or file-like tools, that he is guilty of violating the law.
Right. If I only had the verse in Leviticus 19 that says, don't destroy the corners of your beard, you might think that if I took my scissors and went like that I would be breaking the mitzvah. But because this verse uses the verb for razoring it, I know something else. I know that is important. And therefore, as they explains,
Scripture therefore states here, they shall not shave off the corners of their beard. The two statements supplementing each other, thus teaching that one is liable only for the use of an instrument, the employment of which is termed shaving, and which at the same time involves the destruction of the hair. And this results only from the use of a razor.
Right, so in order to violate the commandment, you both have to destroy the hair and do it by using a razor implement. And if you destroy the hair in some other way, or you razor without destroying the hair, which I don't know is possible, then you have not violated the mitzvah, which is why you can see clean-shaven Jewish men. They're just not using a razor. They may be using a, I always mispronounce this word, dilapidary cream, right? Some sort of, what? Depilatory, thank you. Dilapidated is what I feel. Depilatory cream. Thanks. I told you I always mispronounce it. I was right in being wrong. Those creams and other chemicals that kill hair, or if someone wanted to use electrolysis to destroy the follicles, that would also be fine. If someone wanted to use scissors to trim their beard down to stubble, that would be fine. And in the modern world, using an electric razor, which doesn't actually raise with a sharp blade that's just spinning against the skin, but mostly, because there's different mechanics in different razors, but most of them operate off a scissor mechanism, hair, and it slices with the blade pushing it against the other piece of metal. It's essentially making a spiral scissor cutting action. And so you can see clean-shaven Jewish men who are still keeping the law itself. Make sense? You can see how easily it would be to not reach that conclusion if you weren't looking at both verses, or if you assumed that both verses were not helping each other, or if you didn't bother actually read the words of the sages who have thought about this for a couple thousand years to make sure we get it right. Because left to our own, we might not cut it.
So to speak.
So to speak. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure I understand why one is okay and the other one isn't. What raising and shaving and cutting have to do with it.
Let me ask you another question, because that's the traditional way to answer a question.
Yeah.
Why is it okay to eat a chicken but not okay to eat an eagle?
Because it's stated.
Because that's the way it's stated, right? So what the rabbis were very careful to try and avoid was letting ourselves be guided by what we thought was the spirit of the law. We certainly want to understand the spirit, but we believe that the spirit is best understood by looking at the letter of the law. One of the basic principles of Midrash, of understanding the text from itself, is God has an infinite vocabulary. Right? God is the ultimate author. And therefore, if God had wanted to say, don't destroy your beard in any way, shape, or form, he would not have used the word razor in this verse. And because he did use the term razor, we should take him at his word, but literally take him at his word, that he meant don't destroy it with a razor. Now, why should God care whether I destroy it with a razor or whether I destroy it with electrolysis? That I don't know. But what I do know is God could have prevented the electrolysis if he had worded it differently. And because he didn't word it differently, apparently that is not something he's trying to prevent. So it is a difficult logical position to accept, that what I think he meant in the big terms is not what the small terms actually say. But that's part of what it means to sublimate our will to what the Torah actually says, rather than what we think it ought to have said, or what it probably meant, even though it doesn't actually say it.
Well, my head is going around. I mean, the eagle and the chicken thing is a little bit different, because you can still eat something. I mean, it's
Right.
What I'm trying to think about is, it's not the cutting of the, it's not the shaving or the cutting of the hair, facial hair. It's the means of doing it.
Right.
So in other words, the ultimate, if someone wanted to get there because of the wording, they can get to the point where they can be clean shaven.
Right.
So I'm wondering what the deal is. It's not the prohibition of being clean shaven that's here.
It seems to be the mechanic.
It's the implement. It's the tool that you use to do that.
And that we are going to eventually come back to in a more, what's the right word, a collective way. That is to say, the question of what might be underlying some of these prohibitions, like why can't I, trim my hair, shave it down when I'm in mourning? Why can't I, as we're going to see in the next passage, make the cuts on myself when I'm in mourning? We are eventually going to come back to a reason why all of these things may have been prohibited, which has little to do with the actions themselves, and more of the reason why the actions might have been done in that way.
Well,
So
I'm thinking about, unfortunately, I've known kids who cut themselves.
yes.
And when you're in a grief-stricken mode, if you have a utensil that could, cut yourself this way or cut yourself that way, you might not be thinking. That's the only thing I can think of that, is stay away from that.
As a safety measure.
As a tool versus result of what the tool produces.
That is a very interesting way of looking at it. The sages are going to offer an additional explanation for why all of these practices were prohibited in the unique way that they were being done. But we're going to have to wait for that, because we got to get a little bit more down on the page first. So, nor shall they make any incision in their flesh. This is stated in addition to the law in Leviticus 19:28 for the following reason, because it is said there of the ordinary Israelites, you shall not make a cutting in your flesh for the dead. I might think that if one made 5 incisions at the same time, he is liable to the punishment of lashes only once. That is to say, you did 5 things, but it's really only one commandment being violated, one action cumulatively, so you only get punished once for it. But Scripture therefore states here, they shall not incise an incision, to make one liable for each and every incision. For this word would be redundant if it added nothing to the previous prohibition. It must therefore have been added for the purpose of deriving
halakha, since it ought to have written only, "You shall not incise," and I would then have known that it refers to making incisions, and consequently, the intention of Scripture by using the term "they shall not incise an incision" is to make one liable to punishment for each incision.
Okay, so, which is a very long way of saying that in verse 5, the phrase that's being used for incision is used both as the verb and the noun. You shall not incise an incision. And what the Sifra that Rashi is quoting here is trying to tell us is that you didn't actually need to say, you shall not incise an incision. You should just say, you will not incise your flesh, and be done with it. Why bring the singular form of the word incision after the verb incise? And he's saying because by using that singular, you are now making it clear that any incision is itself a unique and separate violation, and therefore you would be punished 5 times if you were to make 5 incisions. By the way, this idea about not incising your flesh is the root reason also why we do not do tattoos in Judaism.
Could it be in many other places an emphasis?
Well, so that's
Told you might, you
right.
Really shouldn't.
You surely shall not. Right. So it's not exactly the infinitive form that's used in Mot Yumat and other places where emphasis is being added. It's a verb noun form, which is a little more out of the ordinary, and that's why the rabbis of the Sifra were trying to say there must be a halacha here more than just style. There must be some substance that's being described. Now, the ultimate answer, of course, is no difference. Don't incise. But the question is, how do you measure the degree of transgression? Do you remember it? Do you measure it by saying he incised at all and therefore he is punished, or do you say the number of incisions is equal to the punishment? And this is saying this one little word is telling us how to answer that question.
So this took place. People cut themselves?
They did.
For what reason?
For the dead.
For mourning.
For mourning purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that idea in actually in just about 2 sentences. So now we're going to switch to Ibn Ezra, who also has this to say.
They will not make their heads bald as a sign of mourning.
Also what Rashi said, just confirming that it's not only Rashi who thought this is about doing it on behalf of the departed.
They will not shave the corners of their beards, also as a sign of mourning. For such is the custom in certain areas in Chaldea.
All right. So among the Chaldeans, among other parts of the Middle East, apparently the way they mourned was by cutting and shaving and doing other actions as a sign of mourning. And what Ibn Ezra is arguing here is that the reason we're not supposed to do it is because that's what they do. Which comes back to the question that you were having of why this way. If God didn't want us to touch our beards at all, why did he leave this loophole that says just don't do it by razor? It could very well be, says Ibn Ezra and other commentators, that it was specifically using the razor that was seen as an idolatrous practice, or the practice of idolaters, rather. That was the way they did it. And therefore, the way they do it, we will not do. Making the beard shorter or even being clean shaven is prohibited, but we're definitely not going to do it the way they do. And that topic will come back up again at the very end of the page, which we should be able to get to in less than 15 minutes.
And in our current mourning practices, we do the opposite. We don't cut our hair.
Absolutely. We don't cut our hair. We don't trim our beards. Even if one normally gets clean shaven during the Shloshim period, one allows the beard to grow as much as it may. And that is indeed the current practice, which is based off this idea that we proactively don't do anything at a time when it might look like what we were doing was an imitation of the mourning practices of other nations, where they would, in a sense, they would disfigure themselves in grief. They would show how sad they were by either mutilating their beards or their hair, or actually scarring their flesh as a sign of their grief. And Judaism, the Torah says, no, you could look unkept, that's fine, but no permanent damage, no obvious deliberate attempts to disfigure yourself.
I want to tell you something. My boy wanted to go to Algeria,
Mm-hmm.
to Algiers, and ask his father.
Right.
And Capital, let's go to Algeria. And my husband told him, no, not, especially now, because the Muslims are going to kill you and kill me because we don't have beer.
Ah.
Because
Right.
they throw out their beer.
Right.
And it's a sign of their religion.
Right. And in some communities, if you don't have a beard, then you must be an apostate. You are an enemy of the faith, and therefore, yeah. Right. So and that's where, again, I don't know the origins of the Muslim law, but within Jewish law, if you see a Jewish man who's clean shaven, you don't automatically assume that he is a rejecting Torah. He can keep Torah and still have a clean face. Now, personally, I like my beard, but it just so happens that the other men in the room also have beards. But that's a coincidence, I'm sure. But it's certainly it's that's how I began, to be honest. But it is possible to be a very devout, very committed Jewish man and not have a beard, and still be keeping the Torah as best as humanly possible. Okay, let's keep finishing up Ibn Ezra's commentary here.
The whole of Israel?
Yeah, the surrounding
Is that right?
I think you're on the surrounding
The
context.
surrounding context here explains the previously given commandment regarding the corners of your beard. The whole of Israel has already received these commandments, but Scripture admonishes the Kohanim in particular to teach us as someone who does shave his beard, or his head or his beard, or cut his flesh, may not minister before God.
All right, so Ibn Ezra is answering a second level question. Right, Rashi answered the first level question, which is, why do we mention it in this place and this place? And he says, well, each one has separate words that allow us to then put them together and understand the bigger picture. And Ibn Ezra is asking the second level question, which is, why did God scatter the words? Why not just take the words that are connected to the Kohanim and put them in the part about the Israelites and be done with it, and only need to say it once, rather than saying it in two parts that we then have to put together? And Ibn Ezra's answer is, because we wanted to add a rule that applies only to the Kohanim, which is, unlike the rest of us, where if we do these things, we are simply punished for doing them, they are not only punished, they are also now disqualified from serving at the altar. And so there is something special that's being added by its placement here, rather than having all the information that was needed at the place where the Israelites as a whole were being given this warning. Clever guy, Ibn Ezra. Right? There's got to be a reason why it was organized this way, and it's our duty to try and figure it out, and then to argue about what we think. And that way, no one's relying only on themselves. All right, onward.
Even though I have permitted the priests to defile themselves, to bury their close relatives, and express mourning rites, I have not permitted them to exaggerate such displays of mourning, to include the making of bald spots on their heads, and to make incisions in their flesh. As our sages phrased it, just as the previous verses dealt with the dead, so the verses in front of us deal with honor for the dead.
All right, so Rashi takes that same idea that Ibn Ezra was basing off, which is this has to be a linked theme, and he gives a different answer for why are we talking about this stuff with the Kohanim in particular, with it in some ways at least, with the Israelites as a whole. And his answer? Because I just gave the Kohanim permission to go and be with their dead of those of the close ones. And they might have thought, having read that, oh, okay, so it's all allowed, because if it's for mourning, then I'm able to override the other restrictions. Because normally I can't make myself ritually impure, but for them I can. So that means for them, I should be able to do other things that normally I can't. And therefore, the Torah comes right here and says, there are exceptions and there are not exceptions. And this idea in particular of the exaggerated displays of grief, I think, is very poignant. That what Rashi is saying is that for someone to go out of their way to say, oh, I'm so sad, I'm so miserable, I'm going to cut my beard and I'm going to shave my head and I'm going to gash myself and let the blood run down me to show everyone how sad. That's not really mourning. That is being ostentatious. It's showing off while being in grief. And that's kind of the opposite of the grief. It's like taking the opportunity of someone's death to show everyone else how amazingly pious and sensitive you are. And that's not really considering the dead. That's not really thinking about them. That's thinking about yourself. And Rashi is basically saying, cool it, which is a very good, by the way, rule of thumb for us in general. Not that we shouldn't show grief for our dead, but we should not go out of our way to exaggerate the displays of grief. So too when it comes to the actual burial. People, unfortunately, sometimes will find the most elaborate coffin they can get or the biggest tombstone they can buy. And that's not what we're looking for here. We don't need to be ostentatious in that way.
Did the women have other different ways of showing their grief? They're not shaving their heads.
Well, I mean, obviously women couldn't shave their heads. They couldn't gash themselves either. They didn't have a beard to worry about. But the other two were definitely the normal restrictions still applied to women as well as men. And the other signs of mourning, of sitting Shiva, of Shloshim, or of the year, the rending of clothes, those were also incumbent upon women. I don't think there was anything that was uniquely a mitzvah for a woman to do or not do that was different than for a man.
Where did sackcloth and ashes later on?
That's not something that's mentioned in the Torah. That is something that comes in the Nach portion. Yeah, well, lot more than Eov. I mean, there's many different characters that will engage in the additional discomfort that comes in mourning. Although oftentimes that mourning comes before the problem. I mean, before the actual death. The mourning comes during a pre-grieving period or a feeling of I've been wronged, like in the sense of Job, more than actually a response to mourning itself. But that's a whole other conversation.
I'm just thinking also that the sackcloth and ashes is not necessarily death. It was
correct.
Mourning,
tragic,
woe.
Right? A woe is me kind of mourning, exactly, or woe is the world kind of mourning. Which is why it has a different set of rules that go along with it. It was usually seen as being an attempt to force a sense of contrition in the person, that one would feel that they would be less prideful and less resistant to admitting their mistakes if they were to put themselves in that kind of uncomfortable posture and position. Didn't always work, but that was the theory behind it. All right. Seforno, another commentator, has a different explanation.
Even though all of the aforementioned were expressions of grief of the loss of relatives, the priest is not permitted to disregard the dignity which his status as priest imposes upon him. Even though the priests, no doubt, mean to honor God in what they are doing, when they disregard the restrictions their status imposes upon them, they indirectly desecrate the name of the Lord. Right.
So Seforno is really honing in on the fact that the phrase we kept seeing was, I am holy, the priests will serve me, they will be holy. That repetition at the end of this, Seforno was trying to say, was there because God knew that the priests would want to go above and beyond. But if they did so, even for the right reasons, the right intentions, they would actually be moving the opposite direction from God. And they would be desecrating God because the priests were violating what God had set forth for them. And that's why the phrasing was so strenuous when it came to the Kohanim, because they were representatives of God in a sense, and therefore they needed to behave strictly in accordance with what God had laid out for them. Because their disregard of God's commandment was a more serious public breach and therefore a desecration of God than other people's disregards of God's commandments. Make sense?
Yeah, and the death of the two Kohanim that went extra.
Right.
Shows.
Right. With their Eish Zara, when they went with the foreign fire and the Nadav and Abihu, they specifically were violating this, and specifically the same phrase, I will be sanctified by those who serve me, shows up in that context as well as when Moses messes up. Again, the same idea comes up again and again. whenever we're talking about the requirement that the leaders hold themselves to a very strict standard in order that God not be impugned because of their actions. Because whether or not it's fair, that's what it is. And that notion that the priests don't have the right to relinquish the dignity of their office is a very powerful idea. That you can't say, I'm just not going to be a Kohen today. Today I'm going to be a regular person. It doesn't work like that, right? That's part of being a Kohen, buddy. And
Lifetime job.
it's a lifetime job. Exactly right. All right, now,
Supreme Court,
like the Supreme Court.
like and toasted.
Well, technically, you can retire from the Supreme Court. Yeah, technically. Yeah, technically, I don't think, but but from the Kohanim, you don't get to retire. Now, what about the Kohen's daughter? I'm sure that many of you were a little alarmed by the notion that there was some sort of special treatment about what happens when the daughter of a Kohen behaves in a way which is not obviously praiseworthy, but one would not normally assume would receive the death penalty, right? For a woman to be a zona, for a woman to be with men that are not her husband, but she's not married, right? Not adultery, but for her just to be of easy virtue, I think is one of the euphemisms, is not a capital crime in Judaism. It's no great honor, right? We don't hand out ribbons for it, but it's not something that one is executed for. Execution for the daughters of the Kohanim. Well, Rashi's going to try and explain this for us.
If she profanes herself through unchastity, that is, that a marriage tie of some kind applied to her, prostituted herself either after engagement, which constituted a kind of marriage tie, since she would require a bill of divorce to enable her to marry someone else, or after marriage, having left her father's house for her husband's. Our rabbis are of different opinions regarding this, whether Scripture speaks here of an engaged or married woman, but all agree that Scripture is not speaking of a woman who is neither engaged nor married.
Okay. So I know it's a lot of parentheses and commas and that. Is that all one sentence? I know, two sentences. In those two sentences, it's very, very long structure. So let me try and restate it perhaps a bit more simply. What the sages are saying, and Rashi is quoting, is that this is the case of a woman who is at least married, that is to say, has done the At Mekudeshet Li, the ring ceremony, and she is now betrothed, which is a bigger deal in Jewish law than engagement is in American law, right? In Jewish law, once someone has said yes and accepted the ring, they are bound. And if they wanted to suddenly say, you know what, let's not do this, they need to go through the regular divorce proceedings. She needs to get a get, and it is adultery if there is any infidelity during the intermediate period. So that is at least what they're talking about, or it could be even that she's married, that a daughter of a Kohen is married, and then she goes out and does these things. That is what the sages believe is being discussed here, not the daughter of a Kohen who goes out and gets drunk on the weekend and goes home with some guy she met at the bar, and she's not married and he's not married. Again, that's no great, that's no great honor, but that is not what is being discussed here according to the sages. And here then we have to ask, well, what's the difference? Why mention it? Usual death penalty that's given to somebody who commits adultery is skila, is stoning. It's different. It's sreifa. It's fire. Now, if you've watched the Sanhedrin Mishnah class, you'll know that the fire that's being discussed here is not the Salem witch trial, tie her to the stake, load up the wood, and burn someone alive from the outside in. That is not what is considered to be the method of execution for fire when it comes to Jewish law. According to Jewish law, and you're probably going to find this more repulsive only because you've gotten used to the idea of stake at the burn at the stake. But in fact, it is more humane. If you're going to execute someone, you would have a superheated object that would be pushed down the gullet, and it would destroy the organs instantly. And then the person would die immediately. So there would be no external suffering as the heat came up and cooked them from the outside. It would be an almost instantaneous, still rather unpleasant experience, I'm sure, but an almost instantaneous execution rather than the alternative. But refer you to the mission if you want to see more. All right, we're hitting our time limit, so we're just going to do just 2 more little ideas here on what it means to be a Kohen and why they get the special treatment of having some things spelled out for them, which apparently apply to the rest of us too, right? I mean, we're not supposed to want to have our daughters running around committing adultery either. We're not supposed to be making gashes in ourselves. We're not supposed to be shaving our heads or destroying our beards. And we're not supposed to willingly make ourselves ritually impure. Why are the Kohanim getting these extra requirements of basically being told you have to do what the rest of them do?
They shall be holy, even against their will. The court shall force them to remain holy in respect to this.
It's your job. It's your duty. And guess what? You have to do it. Because, sorry, it's what you are. You are a Kohen.
Defile the whole elevated level you are.
Right. You, Mr. Kohen, do not get to choose to defile everything that you were given. And that means the court is allowed to say, no, you're not allowed to go to that funeral. Right? That funeral for that neighbor that you had who you liked so much, you don't get to be in the same room as the body. You don't get to go to the gravesite. You can go to Shiva, absolutely, and you can visit with the family, and you can do everything else. You can even be in the funeral procession and go up to the edge of the cemetery. You can do so much. But this, no, stop. You're not allowed to choose to override that for yourself, because it's not about you. It's about being a Kohen, and that's bigger than you, and you don't get the right to just drop it to one side.
Okay. The Kohanim might think they are far enough from idolatry that they don't need to worry about these practices, but they do.
All right, so Barbanel, I thought, should have the final word on this, which was, if this whole gashing and shaving and destroying is all about not imitating the practices of an idol, which would answer our question of why is the razor different than scissors, then the Kohanim might think for themselves, hey, you know what? I'm not at risk of becoming an idolater. I'm a Kohen, for crying out loud. Right? I serve at the altar of God. I am about as far from being an idol worshiper as you can imagine. I don't have to worry about these precautions. Right? I can shave. I mean, it's not going to turn me into an idol worshiper, because I know better and I'm stronger. I'm made of better stuff. And Abarbanel's saying, no. The Torah says no. You're not. Anybody at any time could still make these mistakes and could still be led down the wrong path, even by something as simple as getting out that straight razor and going like that. So don't think yourself immune from that, Mr. Cohen.
Well, the whole thing here is being defiled so that you can officiate.
Right.
And so our Kohanim today, many will not go to a cemetery or be in the room with a corpse.
Right.
Have nothing to do with being defiled in that regard.
Correct. They could not officiate in any event because there is no altar. Plus, the standard Jewish take on the status of a Kohen at the moment, along with the rest of us, is we are all defiled. That is our standard level of ritual purity for everybody, is defiled until we can get a red heifer, and all that can begin to change. So why do the Kohanim still follow these restrictions? Why do they still observe these limitations? Because it didn't come with an expiration. And it did not come as only while the temple stands or only while Israel is there. Now, there are some other things that the Rabbinical Assembly has looked into regarding the marriage of Kohanim to converts or to divorcees and other such issues. And that would be a wonderful study session, maybe to go through and look through some of those tshuvot of the different options that are available in the modern world from the Rabbinic Assembly. But if you're interested in getting a head start, you can go to rabbinicalassembly.org and check out the halacha section. And there are, not just on that topic, but on many, many topics, some very insightful pages which present a more careful analysis given our contemporary situation.
Question. why the punishment of these two ladies,
Mhm.
the one who made, the one who's married,
Right.
go with another guy, or the one who's single,
Right.
go with a person who don't belong to her anyhow.
Right.
Why the punishment is different?
Well, because one is adultery, where you are
Adultery?
right, where you are breaking the marriage itself, and the other is just a really, really bad idea. Where
Fornication, it's like
what?
fornication, right?
Yeah, where you're doing it just for fun, and you have not broken a marriage to do so. Now, it's still, like I said, not something that people should be doing, but there was no holiness that was broken. Because when you get married, you create what we call kiddushin. You create a bond of holiness, and when someone breaks that by committing adultery, they are breaking something that is holy, and therefore the punishment was considered so severe. But if you're not married, woman A and man B, and they meet at the bar and say, let's go home together, they didn't break something that was holy, they just made a really bad decision. And so therefore the punishment is treated very, very differently by the Torah. All right, thank you very much. Keep studying.